Welcome back to the program. The federal government has sought approval from the National Assembly for a $7 billion loan to finance real projects, procure vaccines, and rehabilitate the Northeast. That's the first of the conversation this evening. Oh, back to you, Mr. Gumadu. Yes. Why does the federal government need to borrow? We've had so many cases where the federal government has borrowed from 1999 up until date, especially for the issue of the rail construction, rail projects. You know, even a country, not just in Nigeria, it's been an African thing, a joint venture thing between the World Bank, China Exim Bank, and some other countries in Africa, like Ethiopia, for instance. Yes, and in 2 years, a light rail project was delivered in Ethiopia. But Nigerians want to see railroads. They want to see rail tracks. They want to see rail tracks. They don't want paper, pushing paper. So I'm going to take you back to your trend of thought.
Yeah,
we need to borrow and why?
It is precisely for that reason that we have chosen to remain circumspect. It is not sufficient to bandy around these words and actions of just borrowing, because it has a wider long-term implication. Such implication will include mortgaging, as it were, the future of the next generation. Now, I make this point because the amounts talked about are not just chicken change, you know, using that popular parlance. It is gratifying to note that the government has, as it were, resorted to the parliament, the legislature, who will have the opportunity to effectively and painstakingly deliberate and evaluate such requests, particularly regarding the purpose for which it is requested. I'm delighted to hear from my colleague in Abuja, the legislature from Abuja, say that the reason why the letter was, returned was to, shed more light and make
had a more robust document,
to enable them deliberate on that. The Nigerian people expect that as you consider, if you will consider that, the need has arisen more than ever before to be particular on the implication of such borrowing, particularly when you take into account the fact that the budget is yet to be passed. The government of the day, indeed, informed the Nigerian people that they were going to fund the budget through so many ways, including borrowing. Is this the character of the borrowing that is expected, and to what extent can it be accommodated in the global budget framework that is expected? The whole idea of borrowing must not be missed as we interrogate this particular exercise. Essentially, because when you borrow for a purpose, you will plunge that entity into further penury if that purpose is not achieved. Okay. Because whereas the purpose is not met, you will be weighed down by the burden of the borrowing and servicing that loan. So the ball is in their court as representative of the Nigerian people to appreciate that the budget is yet to be passed, yet series and legions of borrowing are going on at a time when the country is also recovering a lot of looted funds, which can be, appropriated one way or the other.
Okay, Mr. Ajayi, back to you now. The 2017 budget has not yet been passed by the National Assembly. Wouldn't it have been easier if these projects were included in the 2017 budget than for a fresh loan, an outright loan, to be requested, something different altogether? Wouldn't it have been easier if this was included in the 2017 budget and then properly planned for?
Well, I think it's important to put this in proper perspective. There is something called the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and the Fiscal Strategy Paper. That document contains the general principles of the policy thrust of any administration, and this government is no exception. That document, if you recall, has been considered by the National Assembly of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, and that document has been passed. Now, in that document, you have a statement of the intention or the direction of government vis-a-vis the borrowing plan. Now, in principle, the government has informed Parliament that it intends to fund in the medium term some of its programs designed to take Nigeria out of recession, put us back on the path of sustainable growth, and re-energize our economy. Now, in that plan that Parliament has approved, there is in principle an approval, an understanding that the government will go a borrowing. What the government seems to have done now is to take the portion of that document that relates to the 2017 budget, because the Fiscal Responsibility Act requires one of the conditions for the parliamentary approval for any borrowing is that that borrowing request must have been appropriated in the Appropriation Act. Therefore, it's an auspicious time when we are tidying up on the budget for 2017 to have the component of the borrowing portion, which in the suggestion of that budget, the proposal, we have, I think it's about 2.2 trillion naira that is proposed to be borrowed in the proposal submitted by the executive. My understanding, therefore, is that this request would deal with the component of that borrowing. This will be the foreign component. We must understand that once the Parliament passes a budget, and it is a budget deficit, you have approved that the government should borrow. As long as you pass a deficit budget, there is a borrowing component.
Okay, let me ask you quickly, in not so many words. Your portfolio also includes chairing the Debt Management Committee, the AIDS Loans and Debt Management. What is the House of Representatives, which is your constituency, going to do to ensure proper implementation, peradventure this loan request is granted?
Well, the workings of Parliament is like this. Every ministry or department of agency of government is supervised by a standing committee of the House. Aviation, transportation, health, education, agriculture, including the presidency. There is a committee of the National Assembly that supervises the operations of those agencies. In the event that this proposal is approved by Parliament, that process would involve having appraised the need for these loans, the terms of the loans, the repayment plan of government, the impact of that loan on the growth and human development of our country. And that document would form the working papers, as it were, for these various committees. So, for example, you mentioned a request for polio vaccination. That may be managed by the Ministry of Health. There is a standing committee of the House for that sector. That committee would take that document to monitor in its oversight activities.
All right, Mr. Jai. All right, Mr. Jai. Well, I'm afraid we have to leave it at that point because we need to draw the program to a close. Thank you very much, Mr. Malaki Ugumadu, for joining us on the program, and Ms. Honorable Adeyinka Ajayi, the Chairman, House Committee on AIDS Loans and Debt Management, for joining us on the program. Well, that's where we wrap it up tonight. We'll continue the conversation on our social media handles. Join us again tomorrow. I'm Imana Amawe. Bye for now.